from the Signature Bank Studios.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Somebody should tell California Governor Patrick Bateman that he has to get through a primary first if he wants to be president of the United States.
Okay.
How is that podcast working out for him? By the way, how's that podcast working out for him while we continue to get images back from Pacific Palisades and other places decimated by the wildfires where not much has been done? Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom is focused on his podcast. That may be informing some of the data coming out of a new poll by Capital Weekly, which is a political outlet in California. And I don't think like this exchange with Steve Bannon is going to help his numbers much. Newsom's positioning here is I'm the MAGA whisperer. I can talk to the leading lights of MAGA world and be constructive and show us how we do this and sort of move the party to be less acrimonious even while we stick to our guns, so to speak. But is Newsom really sticking to his guns? This is an exchange between him and Bannon, the most recent guest on tariffs.
But let's talk about those red states. Aren't they disproportionately the ones impacted by these tariffs? I mean, to your point, there's going to be some tears here. And I appreciate the larger geopolitical and what you're trying to argue for ultimately coming out on the other side. But this transition is not overnight. The transition will come at real cost and consequence. Let's just be pragmatic. Up in Minnesota, Michigan, in New York, they're looking at $100 more a month on electricity bills as it relates to the retaliatory nature of what happened.
That's a threat. That's if it goes through some
agricultural. That's just one example. I mean, every economist looks at the impacts of these tariffs. Obviously, California will be disproportionately impacted.
We did this, Governor. We did the most significant tariffs we've ever done on the Chinese Communist Party, and I think there may be some dislocations in the short term, but in the intermediate term, I think it's really the way you get to the sunlit uplands of really having back to the American plan of, remember, world-class industrial manufacturing that generates so many other opportunities.
I think it's a mutual goal for all of us. But industrial policy, which I think is missing a little bit from the Trump agenda, with targeted tariffs, I understand, but broad tariffs without an industrial policy to back it up is where I start to lose a little.
Well, I don't think Gavin Newsom knows what industrial policy means. But regardless, I mean, being lectured about protectionist policies by Gavin Newsom is like being lectured on protectionist policies by Justin Trudeau or the EU, for that matter. So there's no distinction there. So it's all just sort of tonality that he is trying to sell, being unctuous, as is his wont, and disingenuous, as is his brand. Well, what are the numbers? Gavin Newsom's favorability amongst liberals, self-identified, has declined from 46 to 30. Some Republicans agree with some of his alleged stances. They overwhelmingly view him as insincere, calling him fake and pandering. Gee, that's really hard to pick up on. His net favorability dropped from +4 to -6, which is a 10-point swing in the wrong direction. And only 13% of voters had an improved perception of him, and only 1 in 5 said the podcast made them want to tune in for more. So a part of that is a function of Gavin Newsom. Part of that may just be a function of the political landscape. Something else, too, that has the left siding with Tren de Aragua, as Jasmine Crockett did, in terms of deportations. They've got a problem. They've got many problems, but one of the problems that is particular to mass deportations and essentially the elimination of gotaways, the 95% reduction in illegal crossings since Trump took office. The problem is that blue states are hemorrhaging population. And a good piece by Nate Moore over at the Liberal Patriot, The Blue State Exodus Should Scare Democrats, looks at the projected 2030 census, the remapping that will occur and reapportionment that will occur as part of the 2030 census. And what you see is Texas gaining 4, congressional seats. Florida gaining 4 congressional seats.
Wow.
New York losing 2. Connecticut losing 1. Illinois losing 1. Wisconsin losing 1. Minnesota losing 1. California losing 3.
Wow.
Idaho gaining 1. Nevada gaining 1. That is bad for the electoral math if you are a man or woman of the left. Okay. And it also explains why, for example, you see our Governor Jelly Belly taking the position of, I'm going to be the most over the top, the most outlandish critic of Trump, because he's playing to the base of the party that he's trying to appeal to in a primary in 2028, isn't he? For more on this, and see if he agrees with my supposition on it, David Drucker joins us, senior writer for The Dispatch, author of the In Trump's Shadow, that is, In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yep, good to be here.
How about Gavin Newsom's podcast and positioning and how unwell it seems to be going so far?
Well, you never know how these things are going to go long term. I've seen politicians that are rising at this point, and if you want to call it the next presidential election cycle, only to be yesterday's news by this time next year, which is still far away from the Democratic primary. I actually looked at this as an effort by a prominent Democrat to reach the sort of male voter and young male voter in particular that listens to podcasts. Right? I mean, it's a big part of not the only part by any stretch, but a big part of why Trump won. Some significant part is his focus on what we like to think of as non-traditional media, going on a lot of podcasts with hosts that appeal to men and young men in particular. I'm talking 18 to 29-year-olds. And his numbers improved over 2020 significantly. Definitely made a difference, and Democrats recognize that they need to compete in this arena. So I don't know if it'll be successful. And often it's not just about showing up, but what you say when you show up. But I just looked at this as his way of trying to reach the kind of voter that doesn't care what Gavin Newsom has to say, but is interested in what Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon has to say.
Yeah, but if you're not taking up their flag, then engaging somebody who they are more likely to agree with doesn't do much for you. For example, it's not like Gavin Newsom is on his podcast, or many of these other Democrats railing against the 45 colleges that the DOJ is now investigating for anti-white discrimination. I mean, it's not just Trump; it's the policy agenda, it's the experience that a lot of young men are having under identitarian rule or had under identitarian rule the past 4 years that is informing their move too.
Well, that's part of it, but that's not all of it. I mean, I wrote extensively about this recently in a piece from Dispatch, and a lot of it is just how young men feel culturally ignored. Not necessarily that they have an issue with the other people that are not ignored, but what about me, right? And what pollsters have explained to me is that they're not really that ideological yet. They're not really that political. They just want this sense that they're being heard and that they're being validated, and there's nothing wrong with them just because they happen to be men. And this thing crosses racial lines. And so, again, I don't know that it's going to matter. It is important what you say when you show up, but these are also voters that shouldn't be understood to be like your normal Republican-based voters that are going to be automatically resistant to a center-left politician or even a very liberal politician.
What do you make of?
True,
well,
but I mean the other piece of that snapshot in time, I agree. Polling on Newsom, which is a problem for Newsom, and it may not be as big a problem for other candidates on the left. I just don't believe what he's saying because he's so obviously disingenuous.
I don't think the problem is what he's saying. I think Newsom's big challenge, if he runs for president in 2028, is that there are a lot of problems that have persisted under his leadership in California over 2 terms, whether it's voters' concerns about homelessness or crime, a difficult regulatory regime, that they won't think about the regulations, but they will think about the high cost of housing and gasoline. And these are issues that Democrats in California have told me will be difficult for him will be his challenges to deal with if he runs for president.
Well, what about his podcast? And now you have Michelle Obama with her brother, doing a podcast. Are the Democrats just trying to save their party or doing something that conservatives have been doing with podcasting and reaching out to people?
I think they're doing what all political parties do after they lose or after they've decided they've lost enough. They're trying something different. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it takes time for them to figure out how they want to do the new thing. But look, don't forget, this is true of both Democrats and Republicans. Republicans felt like they got their. I'm going to go back in time a little bit here, but after 2000, which was a very narrow election, the Republicans thought that their voter turnout operation really lacked compared to the Democrats. So they overhauled it. In 2004, it was much better. You get to 2008, Democrats felt like they had fallen behind traditional organizing, something they'd always done very well with, and the Obama campaign refined it and made it better. So you see political parties, whether it's messaging or positions or mechanics, always seek to do things differently because they've lost or because they've lost repeatedly and they're tired of it.
No, I agree with that, especially on the mechanics piece. But I'm not sure I don't think you're saying this exclusively, but like the idea, the medium is the message. If that's what they think, then there's a lot of data that suggests they're not seeing this picture clearly.
Well, it takes time for political parties to hold these internal debates and come out on the other side. Right, but we've seen it with both Republicans and Democrats. Some will argue the problem is the medium, or we just didn't talk about what we're for well enough, and if we'd only explained it better. People like to make themselves feel better with that. Some of it is just, what are you for? What are you against? It may not work for enough voters in the right places, and Democrats have that issue, whether it's with illegal immigration or how they approach working class voters and how they approach culture. And so they will work it out eventually, because eventually they'll get tired of losing, whether it's 28 or 32 or 36. These things always get worked out.
Well, it's interesting because the apparent schism over the continuing resolution between those who wanted to, quote unquote, shut down the government and those like Schumer who did not, and Schumer taking all this heat from, the base of the caucuses. But they both agree on one thing. They agree that what we're really going to do is we're going to demagogue Trump and Musk and Tom Homan. And to your point, I don't think that's going to be enough. So now whether they pivot in the short term or medium term or long term, I don't know. But what they're doing right now is not going to be enough.
Well, it won't be enough, but they're also not operating and messaging in a vacuum, right? Voters are going to make assessments about Trump and his administration on various things, and that will also inform how they vote. A lot of the voting over the past, 25 years or so has been more a function of what voters are against in terms of, voting for one party or one candidate because they weren't happy with what the other side was doing. Then the party that gets voted in assumes that the voters actually support their platform, and all they're saying is, no, we just really didn't like what the other guy was doing. And this has gone back and forth. So, we will see. I'll say one thing Schumer did that was tactically smart, even though his base is unhappy with it, is refused to lead his party into a feudal shutdown. They would have been blamed because they don't have the numbers.
Right.
Some people get this thing wrong. Republicans always get blamed. Republicans usually get blamed for shutdowns because they usually cause them. But in the first term, Senate Democrats led a shutdown. They were blamed. They had to fold. And if Schumer would have led his party into a shutdown here, they would have been blamed and they would have had to fold.
David Drucker, senior writer for The Dispatch, author of In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. David, thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
You can hear this today.